welcome to the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast. You may notice this week that I am your host, Thaddeus Campbell, and there's nobody on screen with me. I realized recently that it's been a long time since I did a show solo. And a lot of you guys, as the viewership of the podcast has taken off, you get to hear me talking to other people and introducing them and going into their story. What you don't get to hear is my story. I have a story of how I got into self-storage, and I have a particular area within self-storage that I consider to be what my expertise is. And so I wanted to share with you guys this week my story, how I got in, and a little bit of my take on what's going on in the self-storage industry, more in depth in the time that I've been here. I started in storage in August of 2021. So really going on 3 years that I've been in the space. And while I have a lot of access to people who can tell me about things that happened before then, I'm certainly much more knowledgeable about things that have happened since I've been in the industry. So without further ado, I want to take you guys, and I'm fond of saying this when I'm in conversations with people, they ask me, how did you get into storage? The same way that I always do on the podcast. And I always kind of flippantly say I failed my way into self-storage. And while that is kind of sarcastic in a way, there's some truth to that too. My adult career, I've had a bunch of different careers, different things I've been involved in. My original job was in television. I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism from Syracuse, go Newhouse, and spent 3 years working as a TV anchor and a reporter in small market TV stations, Presque Isle, Maine, and Kearney, Nebraska, if anyone's into geography. Not exactly big time markets, but realized very quickly that it wasn't an industry I wanted to stay in. And funny enough, my first job out of being in television was working for a builder in Nebraska that I had connected with through my TV career. And I spent about 7-8 months doing sales for a steel contractor out there, and decided that I wanted to come back to the East Coast and transitioned into a sales role. My father owned a business at the time. We still run that business doing raw materials for industrial chemicals. Got into that, started doing martial arts just as a way to get in shape. And for the bulk of my adult life, I owned a martial arts school. I taught mixed martial arts in an organization called Tiger Schulman's. It was a very big organization in the Northeast, 40 some locations that they have in and around New York City and Philadelphia, and loved it. I was absolutely passionate. For the first time at 29, 30 years old, when I owned my first school, I was lucky enough to do something that I really enjoyed. Now, unfortunately, I enjoyed it a little too much, and I had a career as a professional kickboxer, and continued to train at a very high level with a bunch of my partners, my training partners, who at the time were fighting in the UFC. And that doesn't necessarily do wonders for your brain. I got a very bad brain injury in 2014. Spent 3 years recovering from that. I had massive headaches almost every day, no, almost at all, and had to get out of the martial arts just to preserve my health. So I gave up my martial arts school and kind of found myself in 2017 figuring out what I'm going to do next. What am I going to do that I love as much as I loved teaching martial arts? Because that had become a non-negotiable. I knew that I wasn't going to go back to some other things I tried that I just didn't enjoy. So went back. My father and I went to work with him again, running his company, but knew that that wasn't something that was going to be my main dedication. It was going to be something that I helped him with. But I had to find something that I was passionate about. And I had gone, even while I was hurt, to a real estate event, a 3-day weekend real estate seminar that was, I think it cost $250, and had met somebody named Cole Hatter, who would eventually become my first mentor in real estate. So in 2017, I started to really think about flipping houses. Started to do a bunch of research through 2018. I was a little slow, it took me a couple of years, but in 2019, I bought my first flip property with a partner who also happened to be my neighbor, who was a contractor, and started flipping houses. And in the October of 2019, this is really interesting, went out. Cole Hatter had left the organization that I first met him with. He was with a group called Fortune Builders, which is really big in the real estate education space at the time. And he had started on his own, and he hosted a event at his house out in California. And I flew out there, went to the event, and signed up for his mastermind for flipping houses, for real estate wholesaling. It was, a little bit of everything in residential real estate, and had an amazing connection with Cole and his partner, Ry Guy Burke. Learned a ton. But interestingly, in October of 2019, when I flew out there, I, for the first time, heard of self-storage as an asset class. Totally in passing, it was brought up because a couple of friends of Cole's that he had been involved with in real estate had started at the time investing in the self-storage space. He happened to mention it in passing. We had a gentleman come out at that time, and he talked to us about developing commercial level residential, buying 20, 30 acres of land and doing a planned development that somebody talked to us about. And in passing, the subject of self-storage came up, and little did I know, fast forward a couple years, and a couple things happened. I failed miserably in my house flipping career, made a couple of critical errors that I learned from, but ended up costing me literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost income, lost investment that I had made. I was fortunate enough to be able to pay all my investors back, but lost my own money. And in looking for how to recoup some of that money, went to work for a residential wholesaling company. I was cold calling dead leads, trying to get contracts on residential properties that were in distress that I could then flip to flippers. That's how I knew the wholesaling company. I'd met them when I was flipping houses, and just went and said, hey, you guys need some help? I'm pretty good at sales. I can get on the phone and just pound the phone, and went to work for them. And 8 months later, they offered me a job working. The two principals of that company had started to invest in developing ground up self-storage facilities, and they brought me into the fold of their company. So it was extremely lucky. And remember this, I'll tell you this for those of you that are newer investors in real estate, you're going to have ups and downs. There's going to be things that go sideways. Try and remember that it works out. Everything happens for a reason. As much as we don't like hearing that phrase in the middle of the challenges, when I realized that I was going to lose 6 figures worth of money in my flipping business, I was devastated. And actually, Ry Guy Burke, one of my original mentors, said, hey, this is happening for a reason. You don't see it yet, but it is. And so what ended up happening is I got into wholesaling. That led me into the self-storage business. In 2021, I went to work for, as I said, a ground up developer. At the time, they were having an overflow of deals that they had access to, ground up development projects, and they brought me in, and I was selling off those deals to other developers. A strength of mine is networking. That's something I'm good at, is going out and meeting people and talking to people, finding out what they really need. And I was able to match 6 different projects that we had to other developers, 5 of them as wholesale deals where I sold off a property that we had under contract. And I think we netted $2.5 million off of those assignments. So very successfully, we were able to put a property under contract for $1 million, do the due diligence to make sure the site was okay to build self-storage. Some of the other things, a geotechnical report, so we knew the soil, a phase 1 environmental to make sure there's no contamination, doing a survey of the site so you know exactly what the boundaries are, what the topography looks like, so you know exactly how you're going to be able to build. So we'd add value, and then we'd sell that on to another developer, and did very, very well for a couple of years. And then sold one project that we owned, a fully permitted, shovel-ready deal is what you would call that, and did very well on that deal as well. So had some success there, but as always happens, the market started to change, right? In 2022, interest rates started to rise. Things started to get a little more challenging, and I'll go into a little bit of that as I go through and talk to you about it. But I wanted to give you an insight into how Thaddeus Campbell, why am I hosting this podcast? Why is it that I bring people on? Well, it's because I love the self-storage industry. But from the time that I started in August of 2023, 2 things. Number one, there's simply no other industry like it as far as returns. I love numbers. I'm a math guy. I like money. I like to see things that are creating wealth, right? That's one of the reasons I was so drawn to real estate, because it's been such a massive wealth creator in our country. And then 2, I like people. I like to talk to people that have good energy and a good vibe. And quite frankly, in all of my career as an adult, all of my career in life, whether it be in school, in college, in graduate school, in the various jobs that I've had, I've never been around so many people that have amazing energy as in the self-storage space. So those are the two really big things that attracted me to this industry. So now what I want to do is I want to talk to you guys a little bit, especially for those of you that are not in self-storage, that are real estate people looking to get into real estate like I was back in 2017, 18, 19, trying to educate yourself. Why is it that self-storage has been so successful, and what are the different options that you have if you're going to invest in self-storage? So we're going to break down the three major types of investments that there are in self-storage, right? You can build a ground up development, go find a piece of raw land, entitle it, make sure that the town's going to let you build what you want to build, do all the soil testing and the various things that you need to do. Go get your architectural drawings, your MEP, your mechanical, electrical, and plumbing drawings, your civil drawings, and go build. And historically, that has been while it's the highest risk, it also has the highest return by a margin of a huge margin, almost double the other two styles of investing that you can do. Number two is you can go and buy a value add acquisition. And what that means is you can buy an existing property, something that's already bringing in money, but that has a clear path to improve the amount of money it's making through some capital expenditures. Whether that looks like going in and putting a new fresh coat of paint, putting a new roof, updating the doors, putting a gate and some security in there, whatever that might look like, or maybe even a bigger value add type where you're putting up new structures. You have excess land and you can go add what we would call net rentable square feet to the facility to increase your net operating income that way, right? So that would be a value add acquisition. And historically, one of the reasons self-storage has done so well is that it was very mom and pop dominated. Until 4 or 5 years ago, over 80%, almost 90% of the facilities were mom and pop owned. So there were those opportunities to go out and find maybe somebody who was getting to the point where they no longer wanted to own their facility. They were getting a little bit older. They wanted to retire. They didn't have anyone in their family to hand it down to. And you could acquire a mom and pop facility and update it, put the CapEx that they didn't want to put in, the capital expenditures that they didn't want to put into it, and create a more valuable asset to then sell on, typically, to a larger group, somebody who's going to go pay you a premium for the third type of investment, which is a stabilized cash flowing asset, something where there's not a whole lot of immediate capital improvements that you want to put. It's simply something where someone can park a big sum of money and know that they're going to get a steady return on their money. And this is something that self-storage has provided, unlike almost any other asset group. And I'll show you later a little insight as you see the two biggest players in the games, Public Storage and Extra Space, and see what's happened to their stock prices over the course of the last 5-10 years. As there's been those steady incremental gains. It's also the reason that now we're seeing some of the largest equity Wall Street big money groups come into self-storage in a massive, massive way. Companies like BlackRock, Bill Gates, Stan Kroenke, who owns the St. Louis Rams, just built SoFi Stadium. Some massive, massive individuals as far as wealth, and Merrill Lynch. These massive companies that have a big presence in the self-storage space that pump a lot of money into acquiring big self-storage facilities and portfolios. So 3 major ways. What do I love? I love ground up development. That's where my passion is. I love my skill set, and what I spend the bulk of my day doing when I'm not podcasting is going and looking for pieces of raw land that are going to work for a ground up self-storage development. And there's a couple of reasons that self-storage has been so successful over the course of the last 50 or so years. Really started to become more of a national thing in the 70s. I mean, the storage facility started popping up in the 50s. Public storage has been around for a very long time. One of my friends, Mike Burnham with Storage Mart, the largest privately held company, started working for his father in 1973 in the storage space. So, there's been storage as an asset class for a very long time. One of the reasons it's been so big and why I like it, I remember I started in residential real estate, and the natural path in residential and where I thought I was going to go is to go into multifamily, to start building apartment complexes and townhome developments, things like that, where it's commercial residential, right? More than 5 doors in one spot is considered a commercial project. And that becomes important for those of you who are not in commercial real estate. It changes the way that banks underwrite your project. If you are a residential project, the bank is going to underwrite you based on comparable pricing. In other words, what is the house down the street worth that looks like your house? When you become a commercial real estate asset class, the bank is going to underwrite you based on how much money is your either A, if it's a stabilized asset or even a value add acquisition, how much money are you generating as income? What is your net operating income? Your gross income minus your expenses. What is that number? We're going to lend to you based off of that number. Or if it's something newer, like a ground up development, you have to go get a loan. You're going to have to get a pro forma, a projection of what that net operating income is going to look like. You're going to have to get it from a third party that the banks trust, somebody with a track record of doing it. And you're going to have to source your information. Why is it that you support that that's going to be the amount of money that it makes? And then you're going to be able to get a loan, not off the projected value of the building relative to other buildings around it, but based on what the net operating income is. And so what storage has been able to do is create net operating income percentages that blow every other commercial asset away. To give you a quick insight, multifamily typically runs at about 50% net operating income to gross. So 50% of their gross income goes to expenses. Storage is in the 30 percentile range. So gross income to expenses. Expenses are only about 30% of the gross income. That leaves you substantially more net operating income. There are a couple of reasons for that. Costs about half as much to build self-storage in the first place. And then you don't have a bunch of toilets, a bunch of drywall, a bunch of carpets, cabinets, all these things that in a multifamily facility you have to replace. Your capital expenditures ongoing are very high. That's one very big reason that self-storage has been able to outperform. Now, the second thing that might blow your mind is that the rental rate per square foot that self-storage has generated historically is almost exactly the same as multifamily. What that means is people are paying just as much for their storage space per square foot as they pay for their primary residence, as the place where they live. It's almost mind-boggling. When I heard that number, it took me a second to really believe it. So you have this facility that people are paying top dollar to rent, but the cost of keeping it running is extremely low. And so self-storage has been able to have historically incredibly high returns over time. So in that time period from like the early 70s when storage started getting tracked as an asset class until very recently, until 2020 and COVID, also strong historical occupancy. The space had about 85% occupancy traditionally through that period, and operators fought for that, right? It was hard to get people through your door, and you had to fight to keep that occupancy at 85%. And we saw something really crazy happen in COVID, and it illuminates a couple things about self-storage that are really important. Number one, there are very few regulations in storage relative to multifamily, right? And a lot of states in the country, and we saw this during COVID, multifamily operators, people that owned apartments and were landlords, they had no rights over their tenants during that time. They weren't allowed to evict somebody, right? And even when COVID was over, it's still incredibly, in New Jersey right now, it takes about 12 months, that's where I live, to get a tenant out of an apartment if they're no longer paying rent. Self-storage has no such problem. There are some states where the minute that a payment doesn't go through, you can throw a lock on their unit and not allow them access until they get caught up on their rent. And there's not a state in the country where it takes you more than 30 days to evict a tenant. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to evict them in 30 days, but you as the landlord have the right based on the law to be able to keep to be able to stop that person from accessing the property if they stop paying you rent. And there's a really important reason why those regulations are so different. While self-storage was considered a necessary asset class during COVID, self-storage facilities were allowed to operate largely because a lot of healthcare companies, pharmaceuticals, your local ambulance, they use self-storage facilities to store their stuff. So it was considered, I can't remember the exact phrasing that they had during COVID, but a core necessary industry. The second part of it is the way that leases are done in storage is very different. In multifamily, typically you have a year-long lease. And if you get shorter than a year, usually pay a really big premium to do that, right? So year-to-year lease. In storage, leases are month to month. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the operator of the storage facility can raise your rent anytime they want from month to month. Whereas in an apartment, they can only raise your rent once a year. In a storage facility, typically what had happened over the course of the history, the asset class before we got to COVID, is landlords would raise the rent like 7%, but they would do it every 9 months. So you would see the trajectory of rents going up very strongly, whereas in a multifamily, maybe that apartment rent is going up 3 or 4% every year. So you just saw a very much stronger growth in income and gross income from the self-storage facilities. And so what then happened during COVID is people had to leave their office. People started working from home. Their kids started doing school at home. And people needed space in their homes. And we saw something we'll probably never see again in any industry, which was this incredible boom in the self-storage world where occupancy went through the roof. Whereas historically it had hovered around 85% and operators fought to get that 85%. During COVID, we were seeing occupancy hovering around 97, 98% in many, many markets where it was virtually impossible to find a unit to rent. In fact, a lot of operators were answering the phone and saying, hey, we have nothing available. If you want, I can put your name on a list and we'll call you when it is. Now, when you're seeing something like that, you're running a business, you have this massive demand. What do? Well, you raise rents, of course, because why wouldn't you? If people want your service so much, it's capitalism. You're going to charge what it is you can get away with. And we saw this incredible boost. In fact, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Bear with me for 1 second while I share the entire screen and we get the mirror of death. But this is NAREIT. This is a national Washington, D.C. based think tank that tracks statistics for various REITs, real estate investment trusts, publicly traded companies across all different commercial asset classes. So you're going to all commercial real estate classes. So I want to just show you that the value of some of the different types of investments in commercial real estate. You can see industrial here, really strong. The total value, $523. Office getting crushed right now, $209. Up today, but getting crushed. Retail, having a little bit of a comeback, but again, $255. Shopping centers, $197. Regional malls, $317. Freestanding buildings, residential, $512. Apartments, $470. Manufactured homes, $580. Look at self-storage. Self-storage is almost triple the next highest class. In fact, it might be more than triple. No, so all equity REITs, I don't even know what that means, but they're at $765. So it's not quite triple that, but $1,920, more than triple manufactured homes, more than triple residential or apartments, 6 times what regional malls are. So you're just seeing just this massive difference in the value of the self-storage people than what you're seeing in these other asset classes. So why do I love storage so much? Well, this is today, by the way. And during COVID, I'm going to pop over here for a second. to Public Storage. And this will give you a little bit. This is the 5-year stock valuation. So back in 2019, they were in the middle of July, they were trading at $240. And we can see in the peak of COVID, which happened in April of 2022, this is right before the Fed raised interest rates, they were trading at $409 almost. And now we still see that has come back to earth, but they're almost at $300 per share when 5 years ago they were at $239. So steady, strong growth of their stock. We saw the post-COVID effect as people stopped being so crazy about going and renting spaces. There was a drop off there, but now back strong, almost breaking that $300 a share mark. And same thing for Extra Space, where you see they were at $110 in July of 19, peaked there in December of 21 at $226, right before the Fed announced the cuts. They were at $212. This little bubble here is Extra Space merged with the second largest company in the third largest or fourth largest, depending on how you kept track of it, Life Storage. Those two companies merged in a stock share. And so that's the crazy event there that shows up. And they're now at 162. So from 110 to 162 over 5 years, over a 50% gain in the value of the company, even during COVID, when things were going a little bit crazy. You just saw this massive, massive increase. So wanted to share, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and the invisible, the mirror of death there. I've been going for 30 minutes now. It goes by quickly when you're, even me talking by myself, it goes by quickly. And I had a bunch of other stuff I wanted to share with you guys. I'll get back on again and do a solo deal, because what I really want to dig into going forward is I want to share with you guys why I'm so bullish today. So we've seen, and I'm going to just review, historically incredible returns. For a long time, ground up developments in storage, typically about a 60-month process from purchase of land to stabilization of the asset, whether that means refinancing out the debt or selling the project. Investors were seeing returns, IRRs, internal rate of returns. In other words, the average cash, the return yearly of like 40%. What that would mean is if in a, say, a 5-year period, if you put $1 million into that project, you are seeing $2 million coming back to you, plus your initial $1 million investment. Think about that for a second. You are tripling your money in a 5-year period. Now, some of those crazy returns have started to get a little less crazy, but we're still seeing IRRs on new ground up development projects for investors that are looking like 20% plus. And my team at Safe Storage USA and I, we're going to share with you some opportunities like that in the coming months. We're actually digging into a couple of ground up development projects now. We've been very successful in the value add acquisition space for a few reasons that I'll go into. That's becoming a more challenging space as more investors with huge equity that have access to very cheap capital are starting to invade that space. It's becoming harder and harder to find those deals that show a great return on value add, which is why we're turning and pivoting and looking at ground up development, which is obviously something that I've been familiar with because that's what I've been doing since I got into the space. My new partners, Value Add Acquisition, did very well for their investors. I'm going to dig in over the next few weeks with you guys a little bit about why we're taking that transition and what it looks like, and share some deals with you going forward. If you're interested in being an investor, by all means, reach out to me. You can see my email address down at the bottom, my phone number down at the bottom, the Safe Storage USA website down at the bottom. Get a hold of me, set up some time, and I can talk to you more deeply. But I also want to share with you specifically the key metrics that are happening right now that make me so bullish on ground up development self-storage. What are the things that make it so that I believe the outlook is as good as it's ever been? Why I think we're going to start seeing deals that not only get into that 20% IRR, where if you invest $1 million, 5 years later, you're going to get your $1 million plus another $1 million back, but 30 and 40% IRRs too, where you might get 2 million back. Why do I think that's going to happen? Tune in, stay tuned to the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast, and I want to break that all down for you guys. And that's it for this week's episode. I am Thaddeus Campbell, your host. Please subscribe to the channel. If you feel like you got something of value, hit the subscribe button, give me a like, give me a comment, tell me what you'd like to hear more of, tell me guests you might like to see. I'm always looking for that input. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Really appreciate the support I get for the podcast, and I'll see you guys next week.